Appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join us today as we discuss a portion of God's Word. In this program, for just a few moments, I want to discuss the idea of a stewardship. Now, you might be wondering, what in the world is a steward? Well, a steward is a word we don't use very often today, but it's found quite often in the Bible. But the idea is certainly very prevalent in today's world. The idea of a steward is someone who manages the property of someone else. And we might call it today a manager or a supervisor or something like that. Just different words, but the same idea. Now, there's two ideas involved in the idea of a steward. One is a trust that is based on a person's ability and based on his character and so forth. You place some property in the care of someone else. He uses that property on your behalf. It is still yours, but he manages it for you. Now, of course, we do not have to think very hard of cases of people who failed in that trust. I'm sure you know many cases of where people failed to live up to the trust that was placed in them. Maybe we ourselves at times has failed to live up to that trust. But the idea of a steward is someone trusting someone else to the extent that they would give into their care some property that they own. The second idea is that at some point in time, an account must be given. We find in a parable in Luke chapter 16 where an unjust steward was called in to give an account. In the parable of the talents, we find that again, the stewards, the people was called in to give an account. You see, in the idea of servants of God, we are all stewards. And since we are stewards, that means then that one day we're going to have to give an account to God of how we use the things that God has placed into our care. Notice Romans chapter 14 and verse 12. There we find Paul says, so then each one of us shall give an account of himself to God. And then again in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 5, said they will give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. Both of these verses point out the fact that sooner or later we're going to be called to give an account to God. We're going to have to give an account of how we live this life. You see, our whole life is basically a stewardship. We are all in different senses stewards of God. We all have different things about us, and we are stewards of all of those things in regards to God. So today we need to figure out then exactly what it means to be a steward of God and to live up to that stewardship. We need to always realize that none of us is so insignificant that our work will not be noticed. Those two verses we read said that each one shall give an account to God. Every single one of us will have to give an account to God. None is so insignificant that we will not be noticed. On the other hand, none are so high and mighty that God will not judge his work. No one of us is higher and mightier than God. God will judge each one of us. And everything we have in this world, as far as money is concerned, ultimately belongs to God. We like to think that what we have is mine. If you own a house, you'd like to think this is my house. This is my car. This is my motorcycle. This is my food, and so on and so forth. In actuality, the Bible points out that everything in the world is not actually ours. It actually belongs to God. But God is letting us use that for a period of time. Notice Psalm 24 and verse 1. He said, the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein. Notice the earth and everything in the earth belongs to God. Look at Psalm 50 in verses 10 through 12. There we find the same idea being put forth when he says, "For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills." Now, when it says the cattle on 1,000 hills, that simply means cattle all over the world. The number 1,000 is a perfect number. It indicates completeness. So the cattle all over the world belongs to God, the psalmist says. Beginning in verse 11 then. "And I know all the birds of the mountains and the wild beasts of the field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine and all its fullness." Notice there again, the psalmist says everything in the world belongs to God. Again, Haggai 2 and verse 8, you find the same idea stated. "The silver is mine and the gold is mine, says the Lord of hosts." So again, everything in the world belongs to God. What we have then is simply God is allowing us to use it for ourselves. So we need to ask ourselves the question, how am I using the things that I have? Are you using it mainly for luxuries that simply pamper our lives? Are you using it for luxuries to make your life real fine and make it look like or show off to everyone else around you about how much you actually have and so forth? You see, we need to use the things we have in service to others and in service to God. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, you've got to give away everything you have and leave nothing for yourselves, but it does mean that we need to be careful about how we use the things we have. We should not just store up a lot of money and things and possessions for ourselves, but use them in service to God. Yes, we are stewards as far as the money and possessions that we have. But we're also stewards as far as our abilities is concerned. The Bible points out that we all, of course, differ from one another in abilities, or we might call it talents. All of us have some abilities, but some have more than others, and some certainly are more skillful at doing things than others. But we have to give an account of the abilities that we have. Notice in 1 Corinthians 4, verse 7, "For who makes you differ from one another? Or what do you have that you did not receive?" Now, if you did indeed receive it, why do you boast as if you had not received it? In this context, we find that some of the Christians were boasting about their talents or their position in life. They were boasting about what they've been able to accomplish or what they're able to do. And here Paul's answer to that boasting was that why do you need to boast? Because after all, everything you have as far as your abilities is concerned, again, was received from God. You did not make it. You might have perfected it or improved it to some extent, but the natural ability was given to you by God. So again, how are you using your abilities? Are we using it to glorify ourselves and make myself look good? Or are we using it to glorify God? Are we using it in service to God? And then we talk about our influence. We all influence other people. It might be good or it might be bad, but we all have a great deal of influence upon other people. This is nothing new. In business, they call it goodwill. That is, when you buy a business, you often pay more than just what the property or the inventory might cost. The difference is the trust or the confidence that the business has built up over the years. Now, so then you pay a little extra, get that trust that you already have, but it's based on what's been done before. The old saying is that no man lives to himself and no man dies to himself. So again, we have influence on others. So how are you using your influence? Are you helping others to go to heaven? Or are you influencing them to go the other place, to go to hell? Are you helping people to grow spiritually? Are you helping them to learn more things about God? Are you helping them to live a better life in regards to God's will? Are you turning their attention away from God? You see, this is a very serious matter because, again, we got to be serious about our influence. This is the way that we can be stewards of God. And then finally, we all have a special stewardship as Christians, and that is that we are stewards of the gospel of Christ. In 1 Corinthians 4, verses 1 and 2, for instance, Paul there said, "Let a man so consider us as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God." Now, in this case, the mysteries of God is a reference to the gospel. So Paul is saying that we as Christians are stewards of the gospel of Christ. The gospel has been given to each one of us. Notice he continues in verse 2 by saying, "Moreover, it is required in stewards that one be found faithful," that is, trustworthy. Paul is saying we are stewards of the gospel of Christ, and we must be faithful to the stewardship that's been given to us. You see, we have the gospel that's been entrusted to us. That means we got to be able to use it. We must study it. We must know it, because unless you know what it says, then obviously you can't live up to it, and obviously you can't use it very well. We have to keep the gospel pure. It is not our gospel. It is not just simply my understanding of the gospel. It belongs to God. And we have no right to change it to suit ourselves or to suit anyone else. It is not my gospel, it is God's. But since it's also God's gospel, that means we simply cannot keep it to ourselves. We have to use it. That is, we have to teach it to others. You know, Jesus gave each and every one of us as Christians the Great Commission, which simply says to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. We have to teach the gospel to everyone around us. That's part of being good stewards of the gospel of Christ that we've been entrusted to. So let's review what we've just said. We've said that each one of us is a steward, that the things we have in this world are not really ours, but they're all given to us by God. The things that we mentioned are our possessions, our abilities, the influence we have upon others, and of course, the gospel of Christ. All of these things do not belong to us at all, but they were given to us by God. So the question we need to ask ourselves then is, how am I using these things? Am I using them for myself, to make my life easier, to make my life more luxurious, to glorify or to bring honor upon myself? Or am I using it for God? Am I using the money in service to God and His church? Am I using my abilities in a way that I can glorify God and bring others to Christ? Am I using my influence to influence others for good? And the gospel, are you using that in a way that brings others to Christ? Are you teaching the gospel to others? May we always realize that we are stewards of the gospel of Christ and many other things, and we use all of those things in service to God. I hope this will help you as you live your life today in service to God. Thank you for your attention.